Welcome to Establish the Edge. I'm your host, Mike Leone. I'm here with Pat, who's trying to throw me for a loop right as we're going live, asking if he's delayed. And now I don't know. Pat, are you delayed?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems like I am. Am I? All right.
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Well, let's do it.
We're off to a really smooth start here. As Pat and I have tons of lineups to make together, this is how we're starting things off. But if you didn't catch it yesterday, check out the NFFC version that I did with Chris Vaccaro of The Athletic. The NFFC game is a true Galaxy Brain game. So it was a lot of fun to talk through that. Going to be fun to make teams. I will probably have a ton of fun making NFFC teams, but as far as the site that I'm playing more on, it's going to be FFPC, in part because it's easier to make teams. And it's a game, Pat, that I always tell people it seems really simple, but it's like surprisingly like sneakily complex.
Yeah, it is sneakily complex. And I think I love this tournament partly because like it's extremely simple, but then that puts everything, all the strategy in terms of game theory based on what other people are going to do. So there's really like, it takes you 2 seconds to understand the tournament, where the NFC one, I listened to the episode that you did there and you were like, oh yeah, I didn't put together sort of like a fundamental way of like, the kicker defense point you were making of like, I've got to, it might take you like a couple years to like really get how to play that tournament. And that tournament like boggles my mind. But yeah, this one is really, really simple. What it is that you pick one player from every team to fill out an FFPC lineup. This FFPC lineup has 12 spots. There's 14 teams. So you're not going to pick any players from two of these two playoff teams. Then you also have a kicker and defense spot to fill. So I call these soft fades, where you would really prefer the kicker and defense picks to lose in the first round. I believe it was FTN had an article where they were pointing out you're not dead if your kicker or defense advanced too, but certainly wouldn't be like hoping for that to happen. You also have tight end premium because it's FFPC. So I think you will see some tight ends in the flex this year. Probably not a ton. Like last year, I believe people on average played 1.25 tight ends. I think that might be up a bit from last year. But generally, we see a lot of running back in the flex. We'll see plenty of wide receiver in the flex. I think like on average, people will play between 4 and 5 wide receivers, something like that. So you got your 4 flex spots, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver. Your quarterback, the only other twist is that the Super Bowl is worth double points. And, traditionally that's meant that people are generally going for quarterbacks who they think have a very good chance of making the Super Bowl. You also do have, the added, like if you can get a quarterback who's going to play 4 games instead of just 3, right? So the advantage that, let's say, Josh Allen has on an Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes has on an Aaron Rodgers, they get to the Super Bowl, they get the double points going against Rodgers, who had a bye in the first round. So I think that pretty much sums up the basic strategy.
Yeah. And where it gets, first of all, shout out to Murphy, although I think he left the shot now, but we got a little bit of Murphy action. Pat's dog in the background. For those of you listening on podcast, you did not get the Murphy action, but I did. So I'm grateful for that. But where it gets complex, like Pat described the game, it seems really simple. Take 1 player per team, leave 2 off and get rolling. Where it's confusing is you're not always comparing players like directly to one another. Like it's not just, does Josh Allen outscore Tom Brady? It's like, does Josh Allen outscore the next closest? Does Josh Allen outscore Stephon Diggs more than Tom Brady outscores Mike Evans? And there's a lot of, and it's that Fournette, times like,
and Gronk.
Yeah. And Gronk. Yeah. And it gets convoluted, because it's not just 2 teams, it's 14 teams that you're doing that math on across. And that's where it's a really interesting game. And to help me think through the dynamic of, not just your positional value, like where do you rank relative to everybody else at your position, but your team value, I really like to think through scenarios and like draft these things scenario based. I think Allen's a good example for Buffalo, where if he goes to the Super Bowl, it's just really hard to not see Josh Allen in the optimal lineup with his rushing ability, and the Bills spread the ball around a little bit and they're going to score a ton. And, there's just aren't a lot of paths to somebody else being the optimal. Whereas if you put Kansas City in that same spot, Mahomes is a favorite to be in the optimal, but Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce can put up some pretty big games and outscore him, especially with the variance in the Super Bowl, with that being 2x. There's a little bit more. And then like on the exact opposite end of the spectrum would be a team like Green Bay, where, Devontae Adams might be favored over Aaron Rodgers in the Super Bowl just because of the way that they're going to score points. So it is important to understand your scenario where, if you think the Bills are going to go to the Super Bowl, you almost have to have Allen, and then that'll affect what you do on KC, and it'll flow through to the rest of your lineup.
Yeah, I agree, because I think with Allen, you just have, so many less ways that it can go wrong for basically you're fading Singletary and Diggs. No one's really going to play anyone else on anyone else on the Bills. You point out the Chiefs stuff. One thing with, Hill and Kelce, obviously they could have the big game in the Super Bowl and pass him. I think there's also the chance that no one's going to play the KC running backs, and they shouldn't. They're not good plays. But we've seen the Chiefs, when they've made runs before, they've leaned on the running game. So you could see it could be split up three ways and not help anybody. Where you get, maybe Derek Gore snipes a touchdown, you get CEH, you get Darrell Williams. It's all split up. But Mahomes doesn't have a huge Super Bowl, and Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce, let's say Travis Kelce because the tight end premium racks up catches. So there's outs beyond just like the 40-point Tyreek game or the 40-point Kelce game in the Super Bowl where you could make up a lot of ground on Mahomes, and I think that's a bit harder for Allen just because of the rushing touchdown equity, and he's probably outscored Singletary, I think in particular, over like a 3 or 4 game run. You probably already have a lead going into the Super Bowl with that.
Yeah. So the question I asked Chris yesterday, I'll ask you today as kind of like a good spot to start now that we got that, kind of the logistics out of the way is, what are the mistakes people make? The most common mistakes you see people making when they're setting their FFPC lineups for this.
I think the most common mistake is like you're thinking, okay, I need to get off the board here because there's going to be a lot of chalk in this tournament. And one of the fun parts about this tournament is that you can play a lot of chalk, but then, and you play like a lot of just really good players, but then, you're like, well, then I'll go ahead and I'll get off the board and I'll play like Cedric Wilson, or I'll play Gabe Davis. And I think like Tyler Boyd is going to be 1%. I think, I think like Mike Evans is going to be fairly contrarian. I think, there's a lot of guys that are going to be like Amari Cooper will be fairly contrarian because you've got Zeke, you've got CeeDee Lamb, you've got Dalton Schultz. So that's going to get split up on the Dallas side a fair amount. And there's just not that much room for a guy like Cooper. So I think the biggest mistake would be like, if you're playing Cedric Wilson, sure, Cedric Wilson could be in the optimal. It's not impossible, but you're taking on a lot more risk to play him versus Amari for not even that much more gain, because the chalk really does tend to condense in this tournament in pretty massive ways. Like we saw multiple players around 70% own in the tournament last year. And I think you'll see multiple players even higher than that. I think we could have Devontae Adams and Cooper Kupp both 80% plus this year.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I kind of put the cutoff, like Odell Beckham for me is like on the edge of the cutoff of like how deep I'll get. Like he's kind of a good, the Mendoza line, if you will, or whatever, because you to your point, like you can get so contrarian without going super thin. Like you start getting into third, fourth wide receivers on teams. I was just on a podcast and they were not the hosts we're talking about, but they had heard people talking about like Zay Jones as a play. And it's like, I'm not saying it's impossible that he's going to be in the optimal lineup, but it's pretty unlikely. And play Tyler Boyd at 1%, like to your point instead. And
I don't
or
think
Hunter
Waller's going to be
Renfrow.
that popular. Yeah, Hunter Renfrow is a great play. Yeah, Waller and Renfrow I think will be fairly tame, because the other thing to think through is everyone has to fade 4 teams, right? You've got your kicker and defense, and then 2 teams you're not selecting. So I'm considering kicker and defense essentially fades, and so you're fading 4 teams. It's hard to, like you're not fading Green Bay, right? Who could, you're not, most people aren't fading the Titans, although I think some people will. So you're fading 4 of the 6 wildcard teams. And, you're in a spot where it's like, sure, everyone would be, it'd be very fun to play the Cincinnati game as a shootout, but it's also fun to play the San Francisco game as a shootout. There's fun to play a bunch of these games. It's fun to play, Ben Roethlisberger throwing a bunch of times against the Chiefs. Like, there's a bunch of ways, or you can get Najee Harris, who's not going to be like super high owned, stud running back, workhorse running back. There's not a ton of them in this tournament. So there's actually some pretty attractive options on teams that a lot of people are ultimately going to have to fade because they don't have very good chances of playing 2 games, and they have very low chances of making the Super Bowl.
Yeah. And this year, I feel like it's even more difficult. I mean, we've got kind of 2 big spread games on both sides of the bracket. You've got Kansas City, Pittsburgh with a 12.5-point spread. Then you've got a fairly sizable spread, not quite that big, in the Tampa Bay Philly game. But then it starts getting tight. I mean, you're looking at what, like 5-point spreads, I think, across, or tighter.
Yeah.
I think at one point, I think Las Vegas was 6.5-point dogs, but I think the latest I saw was 5 or 5.5. So it's like a lot of things can happen. I do think people are going to undervalue bracket chaos. We always assume things are going to go logically, and especially this year, it's really wide open. So you mentioned the Raiders.
Oh, good.
Like, the Raiders guys are interesting to me, where again, you're going to have to play skill players on teams that are one and done. Like, it's just physically impossible not to. So some guys like Waller, Jacobs, I almost feel like, okay, these guys, because people are going to hard fade them so much, or soft or hard fade them so much, like they might be undervalued in a one and done build. And then you sort of free roll the chances that, like, what if they actually win a game? So right. I do like pairing those guys with, a Cincy player, and you're kind of playing like the Pittsburgh Cleveland game last year, where you just had to have a player from both sides of that game last year in the wild card round.
Yeah. And I also think, like, you can kind of think through the scenarios too, of like, okay, you want to play that game as a shootout, and you'd like the out of, the Raiders potentially advancing. Maybe you play that with a Patriots upset, because the Patriots would then go to the Titans, and, Raiders Chiefs is probably a higher scoring environment than Raiders Titans. So you can kind of think through stuff like that. Like, all right, if this really helped me out, how would it actually play out in the bracket chaos? And the Patriots one, I mean, I think that's the one the field is going to struggle with a lot, and like rightfully so, because it's just like you can see you being right about the Patriots winning the game and then still not gaining that much from it, right? Because so when you look at, one thing I'm looking at is like projecting the total number of fades for these teams relative to their chances of playing 2 games or making the Super Bowl. And I think the Patriots are going to be heavily faded relative to their chances of making the Super Bowl, like way more than is like optimal relative to their chances of playing a second game, or even, making a 3 or 4 game run. At the same time, like, what are you supposed to do? Because I just talked about how it's not a great idea. Like, don't play Kendrick Bourne, but you can easily see, right? They beat the Bills. It's because Kendrick Bourne has some goofy yards after catch. He's got like 110 yards and a touchdown. Damian Harris has 80 yards on 15 carries, doesn't score, has 1 catch for 2 yards. Like, you could pretty easily see the Patriots defense being the highest scoring player in round 1, and then they advance. And it's like, and it's a real conundrum, because I think there's an opportunity to play the Patriots, but at the same time, it makes a ton of sense why no one wants to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily see a 2-game scenario where New England's D is still in the optimal,
Yeah.
right? Which is hard to see for anybody else. Oh man, what about the full galaxy brain, Pat? Soft fades on Buffalo and New England in the same bracket. No, not really,
Yeah.
but
Well,
I think that
that's actually, you talk about the biggest mistake. You will see that I was kind of giving the audience more credit, but you'll see that in the tournament where you'll see like Buffalo defense, New England kicker, or Buffalo defense full fade on New England. And that is actually the biggest mistake because you're going to have one of those teams play 2 games. Like that just has to happen. And you've really put yourself behind the 8 ball. Like it's a pretty thin outcome for that to ultimately be the optimal bracket.
yeah, and the reason why the soft fades are on the one and done team, again, when you look at the gaps, a wide receiver outscores the defense by let's say 6 points in round 1. Like each additional game, that gap is growing, basically, is what's
Right.
happening. And that's why you don't again, that FTN article, Matt Jones, I think Chris Wecht, I apologize if I mispronounced that, worked on it, is pretty good. And they kind of showed that you could survive some of those, but you're definitely not aiming for it.
They also talk about how your quarterback, if you get a big enough score early, you don't have to have your quarterback in the Super Bowl. And certainly there's some Super Bowls that, like if you have a Green Bay KC Super Bowl, the optimal lineup for this year might not have one of those quarterbacks. It might have a quarterback who even lost a couple rounds before the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and you do, again, thinking backwards, if you do get some Super Bowls, like a Tennessee Green Bay or something, it does expand the available quarterback pool of like who could be played, just because there's a chance Tennessee Green Bay that, it's Devontae Adams and Derrick Henry, or Devontae Adams and AJ Brown, even with those quarterbacks getting the extra games. And then
Tennessee's a better example than KC because Mahomes has such a good chance. But
yeah, but even Mahomes, I mean, Tyreek and Kelsey, depending on how concentrated it is, could really go nuts. Back to New England, though, I think where I'm at is I think I want to be slightly overweight, like Harris, Jacoby, Hunter Henry, but like not a ton collectively, like just a sliver, just because of what you said, where like they're undervalued to go to the Super Bowl. And like I almost care about the big runs for New England more than the 2-game run because of everything we just said. But even they get the AFC Championship game, like then at that point, there's going to be a skill player. And if you think logically too, and this is something Herzig talks about a lot with the underdog fantasy football, and why you want, it's better to have the best players on a team less likely to win than the worst players on a team more likely to win. If that team wins, there's a correlation in that those players are probably performing better than we're projecting or expecting. In Damon Harris's case in particular, the touchdown equity is likely a lot higher.
Yeah, Damian Harris, I like because that's one thing I try to think through is how is this team winning? The Titans a couple years ago, and even last year, Derrick Henry was big time chalk, but I think 2 years ago he was also really big chalk. And you're like, all right, well, if they make a run, and it's also true for this year, if the Titans make a run, it's gonna be because Derrick Henry is Derrick Henry, like he's just going off. And I think the Patriots are designed fairly similarly, where if they beat the Bills, like we've seen them play the Bills twice, we know what they're going to try to do. We know it's going to be like 5 degrees. They're probably going to be running a ton of Damian Harris. So yeah, I think, and also I think that game's a little interesting if you play it to be higher scoring than people think it will be. Compared to like the Pittsburgh Cleveland game last year, no one thought that would really shoot out. It did. You had the running back, you have a wide receiver on the other side, 2 wide receivers you could really have chosen from. And then you get Chubb advancing another round. Chubb would be Harris in this case. And, Chubb ends up being the guy that you need.
Yeah, I see that, but I also see correlating Damian Harris with the Bills soft fade just because people aren't going to soft fade the Bills much.
Right.
And if it is a cold, low scoring game, Damian Harris just touches the ball 25 times. The wind game was different. This is not the wind game the Bills played against the Patriots, to be very clear, even though it's like insanely cold. Weather is not going to be that bad. But like, if you do look
so
at that
they'll
game
throw more than 3 times.
yeah.
You
They
get
only
3
throw it 3
dropbacks
times
in
and we
that game.
lose again. I will be at that game, freezing my ass off. You might not see me again if we lose to a 3 attempt.
I get it, man.
Game.
I get it. 6 attempts, 2 losses.
But there was like nobody scoring on it. Like I don't even know who the Bills' highest score was that game. Like
right.
It was like, so that's one where you could do Harris and the soft fade on the Bills side. And like, I'm a huge Bills fan. I have tickets on them to win the Super Bowl, but I really try to, and it depends if you're making like one, if you're making one team, one or two teams, you might go with your gut a little bit more in terms of how the bracket's gonna play out. If you're making like 10 teams, then I'm gonna start saying, okay, well, New England beats the Bills 30% of the time, according to the Vegas line. And I'm not gonna get too like prideful on, nah, the Bills are definitely gonna win and play 10 Bills win teams. And
even if you discount it and say like the Bills win, the Bills or the Patriots win 3 of these 10 times, but in one of these 10 times, I'm not going to pick the right Patriot. So I'm going to play it like they only win 2 out of 10 times. Like, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
But
and same with the Steelers and the Raiders. I mean, the Eagles, even like these teams seem like big underdogs, and they are, but like the Steelers are the biggest dogs. And I think this line gives them like a 15% chance of winning. And again, to your point, I might discount that down to like 10, but even that's probably playing it more than the field is going to play it.
The Steelers are interesting because I don't know that that's sort of, I don't think that's true, partly because I think people will play both sides. Like you're
right. Yeah.
No one is going to do Steelers, KC full fade, right? Or KC, like I think about 1% or 2% of the field will not select Mahomes or a Chiefs skill player. So to that point, it'll be way under owned. However, I think, a fair amount, probably like 40 to 45% of the field will have a Steelers skill player. So there'll be plenty of people who feel okay about it if the Steelers advance, as long as they didn't have Mahomes on the other side.
One thing to note too, it is a pretty top heavy contest. Keep that in mind. Someone was asking about being able to see other teams' rosters after they're entered. I'm pretty sure from the leaderboard you can see every team's rosters. Unfortunately, they don't have like a nice CSV download. But listen, we're in like year 10 of FanDuel, still not having a CSV download. So it is what it is at this
also,
point.
Fantasy Mojo will have the ownership after lock.
Oh yeah, perfect. So you definitely do have the transparency on the teams that are out there. Mojo is really good at grabbing all of the FFPC data for pretty much everything that they do. Okay, so if we're thinking of like, it's hard because I wanted the Galaxy Brain with you, Pat, but like we kind of just went through why you don't need to totally Galaxy Brain this contest. But talking through underdogs that could win, do you want to get your thoughts on Hurts as a play where it's hard to see Philly advancing really far, which you generally need for a quarterback? But I do see, the telling yourself a story. If Philly wins 1 or 2 games, like Hurts could separate from his teammates at a much faster rate than other quarterbacks because of the really unique rushing upside there. So he's not someone I would play a ton of, but I'm like somewhat interested in a sprinkle.
I think a sprinkle makes sense, and I think people will sprinkle him in.
Mm-hmm.
It is a little tough for me to see it being Hurts because partly I think we're looking at winds and rain in Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be like this amazing high scoring game environment potentially in round 1. And then if they win, they have to go to Green Bay. So now we're looking at like a frozen, Lambeau Field game. And maybe we get a lot of rushing from Hurts in that game. But, the Packers play slow. The Eagles have been very run heavy for the second half of the season. So, yeah, I mean, 2 games out of Hurts, you're in business. But at the same time, I don't know, there'll be Goddard teams. It's not like, it's not like even that is kind of definitely getting you there. And they're pretty big dogs to Tampa Bay.
That Tampa Bay game being low scoring, with the weather there, I mean, do you see like a Tampa Bay defense soft fade a little bit? That's where it gets weird. Like, would you play like Goddard to like limit your quarterback risk, and then like do that with Tampa Bay defense maybe if you wanted to
Yeah,
play a Tampa Bay loses team?
I think you could do a Tampa Bay loses team with Fournette as well because it's like just dump off city.
Mm-hmm.
I think Fournette will ultimately be the chalk on Tampa Bay because you don't have to really necessarily project what's going to happen in the game. Like you could play an Eagle opposite Fournette, and it's like, well, I'm going to get all the dump off passes, and then hopefully this game is fairly high scoring, and then it doesn't really matter who advances. I'll just get either guy. And Pete Overzet was making this point last night on our ship chasing pod with San Francisco, where if you take Elijah Mitchell, you have to basically be betting on positive game script. If you take Kittle, you're betting on a more specific, Kittle goes nuts outcome. Deebo Samuel, because he's got that rushing element and because he can also just be a true wide receiver, he kind of fits all game scripts. He's the most likely to score. Like in any given game, Deebo's the most likely to score. So he's kind of in the Goldilocks zone there. I think Fournette's the same way, where you don't have to like project as much. He just feels more comfortable.
Yeah, that makes sense. And running back in general is somewhat tough. I feel like it's a really unique field compared to what we've had the last couple of seasons. I first started taking this more seriously 2 years ago, and it went mega chaos the first year I started taking it seriously. That was the year that Minnesota beat the Saints in the first round as like 14-point dogs. I believe San Francisco went to the Super Bowl, but Kittle stunk somehow.
Yeah, it was a Raheem Mostert year.
It was like Mostert and Tevin Coleman, like I think each had 4 touchdown games at different points during the playoffs. And Lamar was one and done. And like literally the 3 chalkiest players were all like, you could have faded them all. It was pretty insane. And again, like going back to the Galaxy brand stuff, like sometimes just fading guys is enough versus trying to find like these 0.5% owned players that like are drawing really thin. Like you could have made really good lineups that year without those guys, and not having to reach insane. And then last year it played out a little bit chalkier. I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. It played out a little bit chalkier overall, but running back we had Kamara and Henry at like 80%. Like they were like mega owned. This year, Henry and Fournette look like the chalk, but with them coming back from injuries and people like down on Tampa Bay a little bit, or I mean down on Tennessee a little bit, they seem like they're chalk, but not as insane chalk. But at the same time, like it's not super deep the way these teams operate. And part of this is just the way the NFL is shifting and like why we like zero running back in traditional fantasy. But it's tough where Najee Harris would be mega chalk if his team had a better chance of advancing. And, Mixon's on a team that also has Burrow and 2 pass catchers people are going to play. Like it's a really weird year at running back.
It is. And Mixon and Chase is like one of these decision points for the field that I think is really interesting because if you look at projections, like I think the last time I looked at the ETR projections, you guys had Mixon ahead of Chase and T. Higgins because you have to split that pass. You can't just project Jamar Chase for the massive blow up game, and you can't project T. Higgins for that either. So, Mixon kind of pops in that sense. But at the same time, we just saw the massive blow up game from Chase. It's fresh, top of mind. We know how high his ceiling is. I think he'll ultimately be the most owned guy on the Bengals, but I think Mixon won't be that far behind because of the dynamics around running back. My feeling on Fournette is that we're going to get the Arians quote tomorrow that he's good to go. Ronald Jones is doubtful. He's not going to end up playing this week. I think they're going to have to lean on Fournette, and that'll become very clear. And you guys, I think, have Fournette as the top projected guy in the entire playoffs among skill players. So projection-wise, I think people are going to start to feel more and more comfortable, over the next like day and a half about Fournette. If we don't get that news, then, you know, I'll kind of rethink that take. But yeah, Fournette and Mixon, the top two guys in your projections here.
Yeah, if we go points per game, it's Fournette, Henry, Mixon. And the Mixon thing is weird where he's going to project better because he gets all the running back work, but he's kind of a dog to one of T. Higgins or Jamar Chase. We just don't know which one.
Exactly, yeah. Which is why I think ultimately people will play more Chase because they'll go, I know which one, Chase. You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's fine. Like, it totally could be Chase. I think Higgins is very interesting, though, if he ends up like, you know, more in the high teens as opposed to those guys being both above 30%, which is how I have it right now.
Yeah, I could see him getting squeezed just because, like, last year when we had Metcalf Lockett, it was Metcalf 40%, Lockett 20. Now it's kind of like a similar dynamic, but then you throw in Mixon where people might go, okay, Chase, and instead of pivoting to T, they go, I'm going to play Mixon. And then you could see where it's like 40, 40, 10, or it won't be quite that high because that's too high collectively, but something in that vein. Someone said last year, Dan Masterson, last year you needed Akers and Chubb. The Akers play last year was insane where he was kind of like the clear best player on his team, but because he was this road dog and because we had those more obvious running back plays that were like 80% owned up top, he really didn't get played. And I keep asking you, I keep pestering you like, oh, is this guy this year's Akers? And it might just not exist because I think Najee is going to get played enough that he's not 10%. And I'm having a tough time finding like who would this year's Akers, like Miles Sanders feels too thin. I mean, I guess Elijah Mitchell's close, but he has way more competition among his teammates than Akers ever did. Akers was more of like him versus all the people fading or soft fading the Rams last year. So I don't know, is there anyone you see that's like similar to that or not really this year?
Well, the two candidates are Damian Harris because the dynamic was that was a low total game, right? You got to think back. It's like the dregs of the Goff era of the Rams.
Was that a Wolford game?
Oh, that was it. Well,
I
did
think
he
it
get
was
hurt during the game, or was he going into the game?
I think he played, and then Goff played in round 2 against Green Bay.
That might be right. Yeah, that might be right. I'd forgotten that. So okay, so it's even worse than I was remembering. But no one wanted no one wanted to touch that game, and I think you had like 70% or more just faded the game, and it's not like the Seahawks were like massive favorites. So it was it's one of these situations like the Patriots where it's going to be over faded relative to the team's chances of playing 2 games.
Yeah.
And the team won, the Rams won because of Akers. So it's very similar to playing Damian Harris. You need them to beat the Bills through the ground game. It doesn't feel comfortable to make that bet, but you can certainly see how it happens. The other guy, and this is like, it might be like a really bad play, but I think the other candidate is James Conner, who's a game time decision and plays Monday night. So like if you want to set $200 on fire or 35, there's 2 tournaments, by the way, there's a 200 and a 35 one's bigger. But if you do want to go Galaxy Brain, like if you do like really just want to play, Cedric Wilson or Gabriel Davis or whatever, that actually can make sense. I think in the $35 one, you can get a little more off the board, but, anyway, if you want to just like set money on fire right away, Connor's out for that game, and then the Cardinals lose, and you're huge. You're not going to win. But I think he's the other candidate. Edmonds, we don't know if we're going to get him, and so yeah, you can kind of. I don't even know if that's a good play. Like Akers, I think was an awesome play last year. Connor feels like very scary and somewhat thin, but he would be the other guy, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing that's interesting to me is we talk about like building to a bracket, but also there are some guys that can fit like multiple brackets that are kind of interesting to me. And again, that goes back to if you get, especially at quarterback, if you get the Super Bowl between Green Bay, Tennessee, possibly Kansas City, the quarterbacks like Kyler, Dak are a little bit interesting to me, where it's like they can get the NFC Championship game. Now you've got a setup where it doesn't matter if they, not that it doesn't matter if they win or not, because you prefer that they win, but like you have outs where, okay, they lose to Green Bay, but Adams is just such an alpha that it doesn't matter. And then the AFC side, you're just basically hoping for not Buffalo, and you're still somewhat drawing live. So do like Dak and Kyler. Um, Anybody in general that you think's just like a little under the radar, or the opposite, just overplayed?
I like Dak and Kyler too. I think both of those are good plays. It seems to me that the kind of, if you want to talk about the same setup as we had with Akers last year, I think to some extent it is that LA Cardinals game, because people viewed the Seahawks as very easy. You played one of DK or Lockett, and you moved on with your life. Like no one was really playing Russ. I forget, he was like 4 or 5%, and no one was really playing Carson. So, Chase Edmonds says he's suiting up Monday. But yeah, which again, it makes it tough to actually play Connor, but you could certainly see it working. But the LA thing, right? Everyone is just going to play Cooper Kupp. Like, they're not overthinking it. I don't think they're just, it's like, playing Cooper Kupp. And because you're playing Cooper Kupp, when you look at, okay, well, then who do I fade? I'll play the Cardinals D, or I'll play Prater. It's just really easy to slot in Cardinals D or Prater when you are lock buttoning Cooper Kupp, as I think most of the field will do. And obviously it's easy to understand why. So just getting a Cardinal, doesn't have to be Connor, just getting a Cardinal in, I think, will be like underplayed. Because the other guy, I mean, the guy that, most people will be on, I think, is Zach Ertz. I spent the summer like basically almost as a bit touting Zach Ertz, and people were like mad at me. They just hated hearing it. No one wants to play. So you're not going to get Zach Ertz at like 35%. You're just not. No one's going to. It's gross. No one's going to do it. He's going to be like 22, 23, something like that, I think. So that's just going to leave a lot of room for Cardinals D, Cardinals kicker. I don't know if you'll see quite as much just pure hard fade, but especially if like people are starting to get squeamish about James Conner. Some of that will go to Ertz, some of that will go to Kirk, a little bit of that will go to Kyler, but I think you'll also have a chunk of that going to more fades and more just, look, Kupp's going to be awesome. Kupp, I'm going to get 3 games out of Kupp. I'm not, the Cardinals stink. I'm out.
Yeah. Someone asks if AJ Green is too dusty. If I say yes, the answer is yes. And I think he's below the Odell Beckham line that we started at the beginning of the show, where Pat just walked through how people are going to underplay Cardinals in general. Like, your edge is playing a Cardinal. So like, why press that further than you need to by taking, the fourth in line type guy? Like Christian Kirk might be single digits. Like, it's not a 1% play. And so like, I mean, like, play Christian Kirk. Like, it's not the same as AJ Green at like 1%, but like, it can be Kirk at 8%. We don't need to go to Galbrain.
Or play Ertz, I got to tout Ertz again. I got the chance to tout Ertz. Let's do it.
Got to do it. All right, one last scenario.
Where does he stand in target share, Leone, on the Cardinals?
I've got Ertz 1 right now.
I knew.
So you throw in the tight end premium scoring.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, the tight end premium scoring. I hate you so much right now.
What does it do for Ertz? Is it good or bad?
I can't tell if you're like needling me over like the Ertz success over your touting at the beginning.
I'm just trying to get you to tout Ertz and see how uncomfortable it is. No one wants to do it.
I already like awkwardly flag planted him on an earlier show this week, and that was enough for me.
All right. Well,
okay. Last scenario before we get out of here, Pat. Levitan just told me it sounds like CH is not looking great to play. We'll check. We're going to leave him in our projections until we get word later in the day. Is Darrell Williams in a KC loss, or not even KC loss, but you could play like Darrell with a Pittsburgh skill player? Like, would you play Darrell Williams? I'm asking that in a very convoluted way.
Yeah, I think he's fine. If CH is out, I think you could definitely play Darrell Williams because you can get. I mean, even with CH out, he's probably going to be like 5%. So you're really hoping for the loss, but I don't think you're like completely dead just because of the touchdown equity.
Yeah,
right? If he's in round 2, you know, like they could end up playing like the Raiders in round 2.
and if
You're probably
CH
dead.
is
You're
out,
probably dead if Mahomes has the Raiders game, but
it's a good chance that if he's out, that means he obviously wasn't healthy enough to play, which means he might, even if he returns round 2, he might not be full CEH, and you already hit on the high value touches might go to Darrell regardless, the pass catching and the goal line role.
Yeah, I think it's in play. It's not like you'd want to sprinkle it in. Whereas like I don't think I'll have a single KC running back lineup if CH is active.
All right, Pat, thanks so much for joining me going over the FFPC stuff. Really fun game. Definitely suggest trying this one. Try the NFFC game. It's gonna keep your playoffs fun. And yeah, I can't wait. We've got a bunch of teams to make, so I'm excited for that. Best of luck, everybody. If you're listening, please rate, review us on iTunes. Same thing on YouTube. You can subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Helps the podcast a ton.
I'll also say we're doing more content on ship chasing about the
yes, ship chasing. I will be on ship chasing tomorrow night, and that is Friday night at 9:15. And you guys have another episode tonight. You guys are running the gauntlet with an episode each week, so you can go back and watch the ones Monday through Wednesday. What's the agenda tonight for ship chasing?
Tonight, 9:15, we have Sean Siegel on.
Ooh, Sean Siegel, the Godfather, makes an appearance.
He the word is he likes playing 4 wide receivers in the flex.
I don't believe it. I'm not gonna. I don't buy it. He's gonna be jamming running back after running back. Yeah. All right, so make sure you check that out on the Ship Chasing YouTube page tonight, 9:15. I'll be on there again tomorrow at 9:15.